spending summer vacations together is something we've been doing for several years, actually. It's something we've been doing for as long as I can remember. My name is Matt, and this is a story that happened 3 years ago when Jenny, Dawn, and I decided to spend a summer vacation in a completely isolated cabin. The previous year, we had spent a lot of money in Las Vegas, which made that year not the easiest financially. We were all in our mid-20s and felt it was time to do something more peaceful, more relaxed, and definitely cheaper. We all wanted to visit Yellowstone, but since we couldn't find anything within our budget, we had almost given up. Don decided to mention this at work, and one of his colleagues mentioned that he had a friend with a cabin nearby that could be rented at a reasonable price. It was relatively close to Yellowstone, so we could spend our days exploring the trails, but it was isolated enough for us to rest and truly enjoy our vacation. Without a second thought, we packed our bags, rented a car, and hit the road. Since we were driving, the journey would take 3 days, so the total vacation would be 6 days of travel there and back, plus 7 days in the cabin. When we arrived, it seemed perfect, beautiful, well-maintained, and fully equipped, so we wouldn't have to buy much. Jenny, as always, had downloaded a bunch of horror movies to watch during the night. On that first night, we were all tired from the 3-day journey. It had been pleasant enough, but the 3 of us sleeping in a van, without the comfort of a bed, had left its marks. We had decided that the next day we would go to Yellowstone to do some trails. It was essential to have a good night's sleep, so the 3 of us went to bed extremely early. The next day, rejuvenated and ready for a day of adventure, we made some sandwiches and set off. We spent a good 8 hours walking through amazing places. At night, back at the cabin, we started the first movie while we prepared dinner and took turns showering. We had been out late, so it must have been around 11 p.m. when we finally sat down to eat. The night was quiet, and the 3 of us were spending good time together when we heard it for the first time. Initially, none of us commented. Hearing someone whistling in the middle of nowhere was surreal, so we all thought either we had imagined something or that the noise had come from the movie. We didn't even comment among ourselves. We continued as if nothing had happened. It was only later that we would realize that that was when it all began. After enjoying a good movie and tidying up the kitchen, we decided it was time to go to sleep. I was in the bathroom with the window open, when suddenly it seemed like I saw the silhouette of a person in the midst of the forest. Was I imagining things? I couldn't discern how long I had been gazing out when suddenly I saw it. The mouth opening and a set of teeth appearing in a half smile. I was completely frozen. I quickly closed the window and ran out of the bathroom to meet Jenny and Dawn. "Someone's out there watching us!" I shouted, completely out of control. As soon as I said this, we began to hear a whistle coming from outside the cabin. None of us knew exactly what to do. We had never been in that situation before. We didn't know if the person on the other side was dangerous, but the only thing on our minds was that no one in their right mind would just stand there watching us from the outside without saying anything. We were miles and miles away from any other cabin. We rushed to close all the windows in the cabin and make sure the door was securely locked. Jenny, always the most practical of the group, shouted that we were calling the police. Clearly, on the other end of the line, they thought we were a bunch of kids playing. It was extremely uncomfortable to have to repeat several times that we were in a dangerous situation and that we needed someone to come to the cabin. Since there had been no verbal or physical threat, the police told us that, being the cabin so isolated geographically, only the next day, in daylight, would it be possible for a police car to pass by. I couldn't remember ever spending the night completely awake like I did. The 3 of us sat in the most secluded area of the cabin, staring into space, armed with every available object of defense we could find. The following day, when the police arrived, and we finally opened the door, we were confronted with the reality of what had occurred outside. The ground was disturbed in multiple spots, suggesting someone had been searching for something. The door and the cabin's exterior bore scratches, as if someone had clawed at them desperately. A completely terrifying scene. We couldn't bear to stay there any longer, yet we were hesitant to cut our vacation short. Therefore, we chose to file a complaint and search for alternative accommodation in the area, far from the unsettling sight. Eventually, we stumbled upon a delightful spot still within Wyoming, but miles away from the previous one, which turned out to be perfect. The following day, we could explore the area more calmly, putting the events of the previous night behind us. I wish I could say the story ended there, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. That night, as I lay in bed, completely settled in the new accommodation, I was ready for a good night's sleep when suddenly, I heard a slight bump against the bedroom window. The curtains were drawn shut, obscuring my view of whatever had caused the noise. Assuming it was just a bug hitting the glass, I dismissed it and tried to drift back to sleep. I refused to let the events of the previous night instill paranoia in me. Moments later, the noise repeated, this time louder. Now slightly concerned, I climbed out of bed, determined to reassure myself that there was nothing to fear. We were miles away from the other cabin. Surely, no one would be crazy enough to track us down here. I pulled back the curtains but saw nothing. To get a better view, I activated the flashlight on my phone, inadvertently casting a glaring light on the window. I had to open it to see anything clearly. At this point, Jenny, always very observant, had noticed that something was going on in my room and knocked on the door asking if everything was all right. I opened the door, signaled her to be quiet, and pointed the flashlight again. Right as I did, I noticed fresh footprints in the ground right under the window. Completely panicked, I lifted my flashlight up and out towards the trees, following the retreating footprints. That's when I realized they led straight to a man just standing there, looking at us from maybe 15 yards out. I immediately closed the window and tried to stay as calm as I could. We were clearly dealing with someone completely unhinged, and if we wanted to get out of there alive, we had to remain as rational as possible. At this point, Jenny had rushed to wake up Don and informed him that we had to leave immediately. In less than 5 minutes, we had all of our belongings packed and ready to go by the front door. Jenny opened the door, and the three of us sprinted towards the car. Once inside, I started the engine and began reversing out of the driveway, when Jenny, visibly terrified, pointed towards the house. My gaze snapped to where she was indicating, and once again, there was the man. This time, he was right beside the house, watching us as we left. Even now, 3 years later, that image remains etched in my mind. Whenever I hear noises at night, whenever I glimpse figures in the dark, those 2 nights flood back, along with the panic and helplessness we felt. We cut our trip short and flew back home. Contacting the police again, this time they took us seriously. We later learned that the owner of the local accommodation had filed a complaint because not only the door, but all the windows were deeply scratched, as if someone had an intense desire to break in. We still don't know who that man was or what he was trying to do that night, but we're not entirely sure whether we even want to know the answers to these questions.